exciting part? Woohoo! All right, I guess we're ready to start. I'm going to go ahead and mute everybody. Thanks for your patience, and switch to speaker mode. Okay, welcome everyone. Thanks so much for coming. We've got 4 wonderful writers here for you today. We're going to be reading from 2 unlikely books, Tobey Hiller's Flight Advice, a Fabulary, and Marc Vincenz's A Brief Conversation with Consciousness. And we've also got Teow and Carol Dorf here. So yeah, let's go ahead and get started. We're going to start with Teow. Teow is the author of 2 poetry collections, Islanders and Faraway Places. Her essays, poetry, and criticism have been or will be featured in the Georgia Review, the Lot Poetry Journal, Los Angeles Review of Books, PBS NewsHour, and the New Yorker. I'm going to put a link to her book in the chat, and we're going to go ahead and hear from her. I'm hitting S to unmute.
Well, thanks, Jonathan, for the introduction. Thanks for inviting me to join you, all of you, and thank you all of you for being here. I am going to read from my recently meaning last June, my new chapbook, Faraway Places. It's out from Diode Editions, and Jonathan published some of these poems in Unlikely Stories. Rosalind published a few others in Rigorous, so I figure it's the perfect book to read from here. So I'm going to do this kind of somewhat of a reading presentation style. So I'll get into like how I wrote these poems and things like that as well. So in 2014, I finished writing my first book, Islanders, a volume of poems on Chinese exclusion at the Angel Island immigration station. It was an achievement, but I was also burned out from the pressure and intensity of the work. I was stuck. I had no ability to concentrate, and I could barely even read a book. I cast around for something else to write, but the ideas did not come. That summer, I took a workshop at the Fine Arts Work Center in Provincetown. The words still did not come, and so for an assignment, I took out an old essay that I could not make work, highlighted the images and lines that I felt had the most energy, applied a bit of magic, and arranged them into a poem. Black Orchid. There are no black flowers, only the darkest shades of purple or red. We look at flowers as a way to know where we are. In the orchid garden, winter never arrives. Gardeners work quietly to remove traces of dirt and decay. The messes of mortality remain hidden, but a secret seeps back in. I had no idea what I was doing, but I could tell I was onto something. I was making found poems out of my drafts, the passages I had excised from other work and kept in a drawer, which is a folder on my computer labeled drawer. Another poem I created in that workshop. Stars. Neither of us knows the stars. You think you see the Milky Way, a brush of glitter in the obsidian of night. I think I see Orion, specks of light. Or is that a satellite? In stars, we navigate the dark. In constellations, we tell stories about the stars. Those who know the lore can use them to find their way in the world. But I cannot seem to remember. I also started to make found poems from other texts, such as the National Park Service's brochures on the Cape Cod National Seashore. Mirage. The tide keeps rising past the barrier of logs and sand. The house is in danger from the sea. A green light glares, the foghorns blast. Far away, boats appear as fairy vessels of glass. I would like to say that I returned from the workshop energized to write again, but that was not the case. I still felt as if my brain had stopped processing language. The world felt flat to me. Every once in a while, I would dig into the drawer and see if I could find another poem. I had to work from instinct. If I thought too hard about it, if I willed too hard for it, the poem would not come. I had to wait and listen. Butterfly Pavilion. I stand before the cocoons, waiting for a twitch in the shells, a crack revealing a colorful wing. There are none. The cocoons are pinned to corkboards, each dangling from its tip, ordered by species and country of origin. Some look like snails. Some look like tiny black bugs. Some are the green of the first leaves of spring. Nothing today. I turn to the butterflies around me, broken out of the shells, dotting the forest with their bright colors. They flit from flowers to leaves, pause on branches, their legs arched, their wings folded. Once they lift their wings, they launch into flight. I made 6 or 7 of these poems each year. I had the sense that they belonged together, but I did not know how or even why I was writing them. Faraway places. Desire makes us face ourselves. The selves we keep at bay want to break out of our bodies. I wonder if the saying that women cannot read maps is meant to keep us from venturing out on our own. Maps are guides to our dreams, where we want to go and who we want to be. I heard a crack that sounded like a thunderbolt, but it was not the sky. Dust blows in the wind to faraway places, washed out to sea and rolled back to shore. Maps hold the stories of our lives, a record of journeys into the unknown. I leave it for the waves to reclaim, the sand to fill, the hole I make in my wake. Early 2020, I hadn't written new poems for this project in a while, so I had long gotten back into the swing of writing. I realized that I had exhausted this vein of writing, and I should see if these poems could be a book. The first week of lockdown, I printed out the poems and started to shuffle them around on the floor. Just like in the writing, I saw that I had to turn off the rational part of my mind and discover the associations in my own words. It took me a few weeks, but I saw that there was an implicit story that I was trying to tell. Many of the discarded drafts that became the source texts for this book were from my travels in the American West in my 20s, trying to figure out who I was and what kind of writer I wanted to be. Passages. 10 miles of concrete can bring you to different places. Your feet carry you across the ground, latch you into worlds unlike your own. You go places you have never been, But what matters is not where you have been, but what you see, what you choose to see, whether you let yourself see the distance between what is and what you want to be. The essays I had published from these travels wove history, nature, and place to discuss larger subjects such as immigration and art. And in these travels, I developed a project that has kept me busy for much of the last decade, which is to recover the histories of Chinese immigrants in the Old West. These poems are rooted in place, in sensory detail, but I don't name the places in the texts. Unlike in my other work, these poems are more concerned with the acts of observation and engagement than with the particulars of history and research. Cottonwoods. Maybe the trees would tell you of water on the plains, pockets of streams and ditches and deep taproots where life can be sustained. Trees stay in one place all their lives. They weather the wind and rain and sun. The blows stay in one place, they seem to say, and others will crush your breath and body. But they claw at the sky, still hanging on the last leaves. When I finally put faraway places together, I saw that I had been writing a shadow text. I saw that in my travels, I was not just contending with the big questions of history and identity, but I was also learning how to inhabit my own body. Many of the source texts were nature descriptions that editors had cut. They were excessive for the original essays. But I see now that it was in trying to name and describe the natural world that I taught myself to trust what I could plainly see and experience. Looking at the sky, I want to touch the sky. Here, where the mountains still hold snow, I walk past the pine forests and reach for a place beyond the dirt of the earth. I look up and see the blue of the sky, or so I like to think, for it is often the gray of clouds, heavy with thunder and rain. I keep going, even though my feet hurt and I will never arrive at the sky. It took me about 10 years to write this book, if I date these poems back to the original essay drafts. It often felt like chiseling glass. One misstep and everything would shatter. Here is one of the last poems I wrote. Ground truths. A seagull hovers over the slick black oil, searching for fish no longer there. The prairie mouse darts and grasses, taller than grain towers in the broken light. I write another story instead, create a world that maybe mirrors my own. You make a mark of your body in mud you crossed when you were 12. Maps are keys to our past, where we've been and who's been there before us. What lies beyond the sea, we never thought we could search or search. Thank you.
Tia, thank you so much. I love the recurring map imagery, but my favorite poem, I didn't catch the title of. Let me unmute you again. The poem about the trees standing still. What was the title of that one?
Cottonwoods?
Cottonwoods. Cool, thank you. Yeah, that was fantastic, thank you. All right, next up we have Carol Dorf. Carol Dorf's poetry has been published in 3 chapbooks and in journals that include Unlikely Stories, Great Weather for Media, About Place, Slipstream, The Mom Egg, Sin Fronteras, the Journal of Humanistic Mathematics, Scientific American, and Maintenance. She is founding poetry editor of Talking Writing and teaches math in Berkeley. Let me unmute you, Carol. Okay.
Hi, guys. That was a wonderful reading, Teow. I really enjoyed your work. A number of the poems I'm going to read tonight are in Unlikely Stories. So if you want to look there, you can see what I'm saying, or see it in print, I should say. I'm so happy to be doing a poetry reading. It has been a little bit of a weird winter around here, and it's nice to be involved in the middle of poetry. In the sense of remaining grounded. You are not electricity snaking out in the moist direction or a plane speeding toward flight. You are not even an insect evading a predator. Instead, you sit on the floor breathing because really there is no choice in this life but to allow air in and out of your lungs thousands of times an hour. How are you? I foolishly asked my grandmother. Well, considering the alternatives. In an alternative life, I would be a grandmother now. In this life, I am connected to her past and the little I remember of her cautionary stories, some related to the needle trades, some for girls who are so easy to ruin. I told a different set of stories to my daughter, though judging by her reaction. Are you nostalgic for when this was a bad neighborhood? My words were just as useless as teaching tales. When you walk with sticks, the ground under your feet shifts and slides. Do not be alarmed. The irrelevant will follow like urchins biting through sea stars when the tide withdraws. Once I went out so deep on the rocks, a sneaker wave flipped me over. At the time, I was staying with people I can barely remember, and I have no idea what became of any of them. This could be called interrupted narrative. That is a slight exaggeration. Only about half a foot of sea level rise in the last 100 years or so. The tide pools will be moving on just like the rest of us. My actual friend from those days is no longer a friend, despite the times we walked her dog and my baby around Lake Merritt. We couldn't stop to watch the pelicans, though I could describe them to you, because a dog is a dog after all. She had to put that dog, or was it the next, down after it bit a child. Not mine, thank God. In any case, in terms of tide pools, while the kelp sways and the crabs are in constant motion, you stop. That dog would be dead no matter what now, and that child is in their own apartment. The friend I don't really know, though I ran into her sister in front of the pet food store. How many of them, friends of the moment in that house by the sea that weekend, are here, by which I mean breathing. It takes me 2 sticks to get down near the tide pools, which is not the kind of detail you are supposed to admit to in a poem, the way the naked body of a lover does belong in the poem's center, no matter how you measure the tides or the heat or the rising waters. And I'm going to read a few new poems also today. This is a prose poem. On selfish, and this sort of describes my current moment, actually. On selfishness, she asked, borscht for tonight? And I didn't have the heart to say, well, maybe not. I grew up in a time when beggars can't be choosers was taken literally. And literal and literary actually live in different rooms. One is for the kitchen, while the other is for the living room, which is never actually lived in. Though for me, that isn't true. Well, I'm not sure about literal and literary, but given the dimensions of the space, the living room went from a playroom to a library to a sick room complete with mechanical recliner. Am I being too literal for you? If I was being literary, I could put the cyborg nature of my life front and center and turn incapacity into belonging to the future. I was listening to a show where astronauts talked about the good old days, and once on the moon, one attempted to high jump, overbalanced, and ended up on his back, a space turtle with no ability to flip over. Luckily, nothing broke. The cyborg process is kind of brutal when you think about it, cutting away bone and replacing it with metal. No surgeon is expected to have a bedside manner, though I would prefer someone who wasn't channeling his high school coaches. I text her back. I'm so lucky to have good friends, having also listened to a podcast about gratitude. Podcasts mostly fall on the side of the literal rather than literary, even when you listen to someone reading a poem about the multiverse. And giraffes, oh my. When I was a child, we'd go down for the day to walk the boardwalk. My father would march along while my mother and the three of us would straggle behind. She because of lady shoes and possibly because of wanting space, and we to check out the windows. My favorite was a store that sold life-sized stuffed animals, lions and tigers and bears, and yes, giraffes, my favorite, with their slender legs and magnificent height. I truly needed one of them, much more than I wanted one of the life-size Cathys with their creepy plastic faces and rough blonde hair. Eventually, we'd head down to the beach, which was full of pokey shells and patches of cigarette butts. My mother had stopped smoking by then, but she said even a butt on the ground would remind her of temptation. The water didn't scare me, though I was warned about riptides each time I submerged. Body surfing, we called it, rolling over and then under the waves, warm Atlantic water, not so much of a shock as a reminder that salt was one of the first gifts. The way home was an itchy mess, but I never remembered that while I lay on the sand, exposed to the difference between breeze and heat. The summer I worked on the boardwalk, the animal store was still there waiting for me, even though by then I was aware of the threadbare neck on the giraffe where lucky children had snuck in to touch it. I'm going to read a few poems about the end of my mother's life. Fabulous. Confabulations. That's how my sister described our mother's stories. How will the world end? Lonely, the universe expanding past the visible stars. You need someone, probably a mother, to create a narrative out of the past. On her shelf, the Durants writing book after book to present an order. The last thing my mother could talk about was teaching. That's what remained. Up and down, right and left, top and bottom. The Quarks have found their order. Always the question, what's left? We drilled her on family members. Who is to say we are more like chimps than bonobos? Makeup sex a gift. She remembered her parents, the apartment above the shop, all those surplus theories of value, my grandmother counting the day's cash. My mother worked on forgetting my father, 20 bad years. The work of memory after the Holocaust, a cottage industry was created. Once she asked, how can these old ladies be my daughters? And why is time unidirectional? A good question, even if Hawking was wrong. She begged me to take her home, home to her father, to Olney, to Philadelphia. On schedule, the booklets from hospice, and she forgot us all, remembered music, perhaps. Now that both my parents are gone, denial is harder. Once I said, when I was dealing with mortality, referring to my cancer year, and the philosopher countered, so are you immortal now? She was a Kantian, and I don't understand enough philosophy to know if that is relevant. This was years ago. The children who linked our friendship are done the first round of college. Another friend from those days, who usually picked my lemons to make Persian salted lemons, is moving across the bay, not to the fashionable side. If you can't live where you want, let it be historic. Eventually, we will all be historic. As the exhibit, oh, eventually, we will all be historic. At the exhibit, a magazine with one of my poems was displayed in a glass case as an artifact of second wave feminism, which was surprisingly depressing, as though being part of history was edging me out of the present. As a child, some of the time I lived with a grandmother who said, in the Depression, we could feed 20 people with one chicken, and a grandfather who sketched the First World War, a regimental task which avoided references to trenches and mustard gas. At college, everything, all the strikes and excitement happened before us, according to the grad students. Though we too sang Union songs and crowded into dean's offices to end apartheid and that round of wars in Central America. The point being, there's a connection between history and mortality, my personal mortality, just as there was a connection between the Second World War and my father's tenuous relation to reality. I was never sure the stories he told about floating between islands in a small boat had happened or were something he had read or dreamed. Living in the aftermath of illness ages you and makes it hard to hold on to your immortality. During all those years, infectious disease was held at bay. Who the hell wrote about roses dropping their petals as a metaphor for age? Um, I will say one word about this poem. You know, somehow being Jewish has become a problematic category again. And I thought this was long, long past. Pleasant Drive, Notebook 1. Ornamental plums soured on our tongues. No one followed me down to the ravine. Dragonflies and water striders drifted on the remains of a creek. So much lawn to mow, and it was dangerous. My mother liked roses, so they grew wilder every year. Across the street, Nicky B raised hamsters, scent of straw and rodent, dozens of them. One December, someone topped the pine. Christmas, we thought. And on Halloween, teepee floated in banners, dirty Jew soaked onto our car. After our dog Benny was hit by a car, he grew bitey. Sometimes I'd send my brother to run as fast as he could around the block. What was I afraid of? Once I ran out of the house to evade my father, not that it helped. We were so hopeful when we first moved into that house, leaving the city. My sisters made friends with the Debbie across the street. I walked the backyards to the bus stop far from home. For a while, I was invisible. Then grew breasts. Men would honk as I walked down the street, pull cars over to the side of the road. I was a shitty runner, but not bad at pretending I didn't hear a thing. Just start trying to figure out where to go from here. Um, the geometry of distraction. You may attend a party where strange costumes prevail. It will take you many hours to devise a way to fit in. Words will be cinders in the fire, hope, light, water. You will read smoke and interpret it for your children. It will take many hours to fit in to the geometry of distracted attention. You will read smoke and interpret it for children who have been chasing each other for hours. The geometry of distracted attention. You realize this illness is a communal affliction. Events have been chasing each other for days. You decide there is no point in organizing them. You realize this restlessness is a communal affliction. Reading tea leaves is an unlikely cure, but that's what you've got. You decide there is a point in organizing them. Night outside. Inside, the air is full of smoke. Reading tea leaves is an unlikely cure, but that's what you've got. You attend a party where strange customs prevail. Night outside, inside the air is full of smoke. You will read it and interpret it for your children. And I'm going to end with a hazel that ends with a wedding. And the custom at the end of the wedding is a Persian custom. Hazel that ends with a wedding. Doubleness of a pink morning, pairs of flowers, whole congregations of sweet. Outside the choir, small hidden birds. This morning I heard geese, drank sweet tea. To travel in a group. The girl visits solitary kittens to coax them to play with strangers. Adorable, but not sweet. What will the crowds of return be like when school starts? Will children need to be bribed with sweets? Petrichor, insufficient joy, despite all its damp promises, enticing the bees towards nectar's sweetness. Long ago, I climbed a crabapple tree, hiding in its pink crown, sweet scent of hunger. They embrace beneath a canopy, sugar cones rubbed together over their heads, a sweet omen.
Thank you, Carol. Very evocative. I have to ask, how does a surgeon channel a high school coach?
Oh, if you've ever had an orthopedic surgeon, you feel like you should be a football player. Like the PT who was telling me that when he works with soccer players, they do this exercise. And then I told him, well, the last time I did any significant sports with my daughter playing basketball, the father who was coaching the parents told us the main thing is don't fall down.
Sound advice. Thank you, Carol.
You're welcome. Thanks, everybody.
All right, next up, we're going to hear from Tobey Hiller, who's presenting from her unlikely book, Flight Advice, a Fabulary. Tobey Hiller was born on the East Coast and migrated west many years ago. She lives in Northern California, where she worked for many years as a psychodramatist, group leader and consultant, teacher, and therapist. She and her husband have 2 children and 4 grandchildren, and she counts her large, lively, and talkative extended family as a main inspiration on life teaching. She has always been interested in myths, legends, and fables, and in the edge zone where melts, collisions, or transformations occur. Her story Splinter won first prize in Craft's 2020 Short Story Elements Contest and was earlier shortlisted for the first Los Gatos Listel Short Story Contest. Her story, The Seventh Blue, was a finalist for the Reynolds Prize Short Story Fiction Award. 2 of her other stories have been shortlisted for prizes, and the fiction collection she'll be reading from tonight, Flight Advice, a Fabulary, was one of 5 finalists for Omnidawn's Fabulous Fiction Prize in 2019 under the name Particle to Wave, a Fabulary. Tobey, if you'll read for us today, let me unmute you. Let me find you. Sorry about that. Okay.
Okay, am I unmuted?
You are.
I am, yes. Well, hello, everyone, and it's great to be here. And I do want to thank Jonathan in particular for producing what is a beautiful book. I love this book, and it is an unlikely book. Not only is it unlikely from unlikely books, but it seemed to me that it was unlikely it would ever be published, since it was kind of a group of odd tales. I write poetry as well, and I do write realist stories as well. These are all odd stories with splinters of surrealism or weird things that happen. And I loved it that Jonathan even considered it. He's published some of my poems and a few of my little short pieces. And so I sent him the book, and here it is. It's really a gorgeous, gorgeous book. And Liz Ennis, who's with us today, is responsible for the cover art, which is a beautiful painting by her, quite a large painting, and I'm very grateful to have it. And I'm grateful to be here with everybody who's reading and have loved it so far. And so here we go. So I'm going to read two very short pieces and a slightly longer piece. The first piece I'm going to read is called Fable with Wings. I think it's probably going to be self-explanatory. She was born with wings, but no knowledge of flying. Her parents never commented. Maybe they didn't notice, since at first the wings were more like nubs or odd bumps. And anyway, they were often too busy with the drama of the day's many log jams and potholes to notice much but each other's inadequacies. When she herself noticed the wings, they seemed like 6 toes or something, useless appendages, though at least not as froggy as extra toes. At first she hid them. If she stood a certain way and dressed right, they seemed pretty much like large shoulder blades. Later, she wound beads and scarves in their feathers, tied them into a plume like a long ponytail, and made them into a fashion accessory. Then, one high summer noon, she saw how free and light, how sweetly deep that blue dome above her was. Maybe the wings actually worked, and well, come to find out, they did. Her first few flights were careful, up into leaves, a bit of leaf muss and flurry, awkward bounce forward and onto branches, teeter, and then an exultant perch on a branch, almost in the clouds, it felt like, looking down with no fear. On her next aerial adventure, practicing swoop turns above a meadow, she encountered a large raven dangling some grapes above a fox's raised and drooling mouth. "What are you doing?" "Shh," said the raven. "I'm concentrating." "Yeah, beat it," said the fox. "I've just about got him hypnotized." Her first thought had been sympathetic to fox. She'd always had a soft spot for those pointy noses and furry tails, and of course that red. But given this last remark, raven's burnished black seemed no less striking, possibly even more attractive than fox's red. Interesting, like the undetermined contest between ground and sky. So she tried to hover. The problem was her starboard wing had a tendency to pull. This caused first a slow drift and then a faster veer, and abruptly she went into a spin, unfortunately in the moment's crisis flapping her arms instead of her wings. Blam, ruffle, thud, as she careened into Raven, whose hover, she had time to notice before she bashed into him, was perfect. Most of the grape cluster in the commotion dropped into Fox's mouth, and alert as always, he immediately swallowed both the grapes and Raven's foot. Raven squawked loudly, beat his wings frantically, and actually managed to drag Fox, clamped onto his foot with grape juice running down his jaw, upward, up off the ground. Fox looked down at friend Earth as it grew farther away beneath the glorious red of his tail, now tucked between his hind legs. Raven pumped his wings. "Grab her, grab that thing with the hair," Raven squawked. "Grab her instead, she's bigger." Uh-oh, she thought, thinking of those sharp little teeth, and accelerated when she should have braked, ending dangerously close to the melee. Fox opened his mouth and made a snap at her foot, which, being nimble in that department at least, she snatched back just in time. The sound of his teeth snapping in air lingered in her mind. A thud, a most unfox-like yowl, and Fox, now a reddish-brown heap on the ground, quickly metamorphosed into a ragged streak of iron oxide after image that disappeared into a bush. There was a sound of whining from the greenery. Raven flew up close to her and peered at her with his black calculating eye. Don't fly too well, girlie, do you? I offer lessons, cheap. The next one, I'm going to read, there is a piece called Descent in Five Motions, which is basically, which is based on Persephone's trip to the underworld, something which, a myth which has fascinated me for years in various forms. And it's got 5 sections. This, you'll see, is very contemporary and has a bit of a political cast to it. And I'm going to read the first little teeny section and the second section, which are in all about 2 pages. First section is called Door. She sat up. Had there been a noise? The bedroom was dark except for the pencil-thin line of light around the blind cast by the streetlight. The cat's weight against her foot didn't shift. Had it been a door opening? She listened. Nothing. Okay. Carefully, not to disturb the cat, she folded back the covers and rose, feeling a bit dizzy. The floor felt furry, as though still made of dream molecules. She turned right at the bottom of the bed and followed a familiar pathway across the rug toward the unlit bathroom. Felt for the door, entered, felt for the toilet seat. Cool air against her waving hand. Stepped forward again. She stopped. Steps at her feet, just visible now in the darkness, leading downward, a cool wind from below. Without hesitation, knowing she didn't know where she was, she started down, thinking, is this a beginning or an end? And then she felt at her feet the cat. He was coming too. The next little piece is called Nether. It was a dark and stormy noon. Lightning struck the front door. It flamed and crumbled to ash. In he walked. He towered. He stuck out his lower lip. He reached out a surprisingly small hand with gilt fingertips. His blonde pompadours obscured his eyes. You're going to love me. I know everything about you. Which is your deepest crevice? Breathing seemed the best option despite the stench. It had been years since she'd eaten a pomegranate, but she remembered the taste, red as blood. Come over here. She patted the couch and smiled, demure curve. Behind the couch, it had been there a long time, was the stairway down. She'd kept her kids from going back there, but now. He sat down, grinning, and reached for her right breast with his gilded hand. The cat ran behind the couch. Wait, follow me. I know a better place. And she rounded the couch just shy of his plucking hand and ran down the dark stairway. No stumbles, she ordered her feet. No stumbles, ruthless, quick. Whose words were that? He panted behind her, surprisingly agile despite his daunting size. Some mutter, then the roar, do you know who I am? Gravel, a dark wind against her face. She would shut the doors, he rushed past. She saw it ahead now. And then she'd call the guard, the one with 3 heads. One head understood forest maneuver, one counted circles of hell, and the third had mapped the maze at the center of the earth. She remembered his name still, Caliban, though half covered in bark and tattooed by scorn and history's ugliness, this guardian was faithful to light. She ran, at each step, a seed sprouting. There are 3 more sections to that, but you had to buy the book to read them. And the last piece I'm going to read is called The Origin of Opera. I think I want to say something about how this story came about. This isn't exactly, although I am very interested in fable and myth and all of that, this story came about in a different kind of way. We were with a group of friends, and one of the friends wanted to play this game in which she spread out a map, Teow map on the table, and asked people to cover their eyes and then, find a spot on the map. And when they looked at where they'd pointed to, tell a story about that spot. So we all did it. I came down on the Indian Ocean, and I told this little story about mermaids, basically. And then it developed into this. It's called The Origin of Opera. Deep in the Indian Ocean live many mermaids. The Indian Ocean happens to be, this has been known since long before the Sphinx roared for the last time, a very murish place. However, though the female mer population is large, there are few mermen. No one knows why. The imbalance is ancient, though mysterious, and so the mermaids have become used to looking elsewhere for companionship of the amatory kind. This is how they do it. They go ashore. Though it is difficult, even painful, for mermaids to navigate in air and on sand, they have demanding traditions, and this is an adventure into a strange and uncivilized world, to them, the wild, they are driven to make. At a certain time of year, they cluster. They follow each other toward the edge of their world. Near the place on the beach where they most often emerge, enterprising local merchants who know the habits of sea creatures of this binary kind set up a makeshift midnight market in saris and shawls. Out of the surf come the mermaids, rising like columns of whirling moonlight from the foam. Streaming with salt water and sea light, they stand up on their long scaled tails, teeter onto the wet sand, and wrap their lower extremities in the gorgeous and variegated colors of the saris the merchants sell them, in exchange for a kiss, a shell, a pearl or two. Only the greenish tips of their finial fins show at the hems of the garments, like little bound feet. Off they pitter and pat over the sand in tiny steps, hips undulating toward the town and its streets and markets. It is always night, and the lit cigarettes of the men who are watching the beach look like stars floating below the walls of the town. Up the beach, the mermaids move slowly, but inexorably, exuding an aphrodisiac and somewhat fishy smell. Their magnificent female torsos are not entirely hidden under the saris. Their dark or blonde or red hair ripples down their backs or is bundled up on their heads in glorious piles by combs that any woman who happened to glimpse them would envy, though this last almost never happens. Women are at home asleep, or if they are up and about, something makes them drift away from the beach and toward the hills at the hour the mermaids come out of the sea. There are men who cannot resist the smell of fish. Foam and froth remind them. It is these men who come down to the shoreline. There they find drifting shadows, indescribably beautiful women mincing along the beach, and these women who murmur and beckon and sing short snatches of the most popular current tunes lead them back at midnight, as midnight approaches, toward the iridescent line of waves lipping the smooth beach. It's a tropical island scene, a whiff of paradise, with twosomes scattered here and there. Couples wander and fold into sand. Water creeps up the beach, sluices lightly over the legs and wandering hands. Some men, touching smooth and slippery skin and damp hair, feel moments of fear, a horror of strangeness. They shiver. The mermaids stroke their hair, murmur soft seafoam words. Other men, to whom no second thoughts or questions occur, bend their heads toward stars and shells. A few pull away and walk quickly back up the beach, trying to spit out the taste of seaweed. But many a man holding a mermaid's hand feels that his life has arrowed down into the target of this very moment. His legs feel weak, and his desire is all to follow and find, to enter and shudder. Into the surf, the mermaid and man step together and wind arms around each other, hips, shoulders, the slide of rough skin, slippery tongues and fingers, down onto knees, falling into water, wetness and swelling everywhere, and soon the sari falls away. Now foam fills his mouth, her breasts press against him, and somehow he finds how, a twist or twinge, and then heat, like stepping into a shadow or diving into a pool when the sun has been too fierce to find first a warm and then a cool current. Some men who make love to mermaids drown in the act. They don't know whether they're coming or dying, then water fills their lungs. They're found the next morning rolling naked in surf. Some survive, but at the encounter's height, they feel as though their arms have been holding a scarf or a dolphin and have suddenly emptied, filled only with windy wet and half-shivered desire. Mermaids are single-minded and voracious. They smell of sea and salt and the abyss. Once they have made love with these men, they flip their tails up, slap the water like whales, and swim back into the deeper sea. There they wait for news from their bellies. The lucky ones will bear children. For that's the point of all this, children, the combination of this and that to make the song continue. 9 months later, for the gestation period is like ours, the lucky ones bear infants. Some of these are mer girls, a few mer boys, and some look completely human, no tails or fins or scales, though they can breathe underwater and have, like all mer people, irresistible singing voices. When these children of the third kind are 3 or 4, the age before which all memory is made up of ocean and shadow, their mothers take them back to the beach and explain that they belong to the land. See, they say, see, you have legs. The children see for the first time that they are different. Go, explore the sand, walk up the beach. You will find it pleasing. The children go, but their mothers are weeping, for mermaid mothers are like all others. The children walk out of the surf, looking back, unsure. The mothers, weeping, wave them on, and wondering, the children walk up the sand toward town. When they look back again, the sea is still and flat. Their mothers are gone. They sleep on the beach or wander into town and huddle in the corners of doorsteps. Most of these children are found the next morning by the people who live in the beachside town, and by one means or another, they end up blended back into the land population, adopted into families, taken in somewhere as servants, or live inured to living by their wits, which are sharp, on the street. They all have beautiful singing voices. They all smell of brine. Some of them get lost in other waters, tequila or music, sex, flamenco, thievery, or dance. They all return again and again all their lives to the beach, and they can swim like fish. Surfers or marine biologists or great opera singers or the drunken lady who sits at the top of the marina steps with shells around her neck. Boat builders, weavers, and astronomers surfing the interstellar oceans. Who knows how they grow up or what they become? But each fish child at some time in his or her life ends up at the beach one strange night, following an irresistible urge. Maybe the moon is full, or the iridescent plankton are spread out on the water's belly. Maybe the water is filled with tires and condoms and stained with oil. Maybe the beach harbors people laughing and drinking beer down the way. Maybe it's entirely quiet, a moonlit night with only the suck and purl of water. Standing at the line of surf, this child of the sea hears a song that can only be a name. It is her name or his, a name made of air and water, land and wet, and yearning. It's made up of the yearning of all creatures, no matter where they live, air, water, land, under the volcano or high up near the ice, to join, to know each other, the yearning for union with another not wrapped in the same skin. After hearing that name, each of these people who are whole in a way we almost wish to discover, understands the nature of doubleness, and from then on they know it. Without being double or many, you cannot be whole. Thank you. That's it.
Sophie, thank you so much. Thank you for reading. Thank you for your praise, and thank you for entrusting Unlikely Books with your manuscript. Of course, I knew the stories very well, but it was great to hear you read them.
Thank you.
And, I really appreciate you being here.
I appreciate it too. Thanks.
All right. We've got one more reader tonight. We've got Marc Vincenz, author of A Brief Conversation of Consciousness, the new Unlikely Book. Marc Vincenz is an Anglo-Swiss-American poet, a fiction writer, translator, editor, publisher, designer, multi-genre artist, and musician. He has published 16 books of poetry, including more recently Leaning into the Infinite, The Sinicon of Water and Light, Here Comes the Night Dust, Einstein Fledermaus, and The Little Book of Earthly Delights. Lost my place, excuse me. An album of music, ambience, and verse, left-hand clapping, is forthcoming from Tree Torn Records. Vincenz is also a prolific translator and has translated from the German, Romanian, and French. He has published 10 books of translations, most recently Unexpected Development by award-winning Swiss poet and novelist Klaus Merz. His translation of Merz's selected poems, An Audible Blue, is forthcoming from White Pine Press. Vincenz is editor and publisher of Mad Hat Press and publisher of New American Writing. He has lived all over the world, from Spain to China to Iceland to India. He was born in Matilda Hospital on the Peak in Hong Kong, but now lives on a farm in rural western Massachusetts, overlooking Herman Melville's Greylock Mountain, with his family and their Australian cover dog, Emily Millish Dickinson. Marc, looking forward to hearing you read. Let me unmute you. There we go.
Thank you, Jonathan.
Thank you.
So these poems are all from A Brief Conversation with Consciousness, which just came out with Unlikely Books. And this is from the section Pelvic Bone of a Weasel. Instilled. In instinct, unwavering, absorbing, that masterly recast on Corsica or Cordoba, the passage of time is in years. We don't go south, they say, it's too meager. It's not what it wanted to be. It adheres to the tides, that falling strength, that strands that weave, that hold to us fast. The heart thrashes, and so too perhaps may be defined in the delta, where walls are cinnabar and the green of trees stretches skyward. Those human acts of which we're accused, the road caked at window level, this swarming of disappearing acts, all hands on deck. Do you feel the fattening of waistlines, the city street at your side, that going down into the flinching just by the tavern door, that plunging into sincerity, all those costs? Don't you wish to fuse with the sky? To toss chicken bones into the sea? Don't you wish to become the gnarled tree? Or the breakers on the sea and the brown rocks in their gentle lapping? Child's play, to change the void and all that sparring. Open the window, come see the far-flung spring leaves, the dividing land and the iced air, the web of glass beads, the shallow walls, the breathing, the heaving of the outdoors.
Mhm.
Evenings spent in the womb. Who sides with whom? Who with what passport? Who with which percentage? And the pleasure threefold. Before we glance at our wills, the chronicle breaks off. Wings are folded and we dive into the foundations more like a pelican than a goose. Here solitary green algae screw themselves together, becoming 1, 2, 3. A beetle sits in the sun. Here we find museum catalogs, everything arranged in parley, and of course, in other modes of expression. Who gives with whom? Who with an unexpected event? Who with the ill-omened? A dream is not a season. Our signal. Yes, we met largely by mistake. Probably you're no longer what you once were. Rough edges rubbed smooth. You are a hieroglyph larger than life. Your choice, you say, asking your own illusions. Bullseye. Have you seen an instant, or were you deluded into thinking so? It happens some days that being spiritual won't radiate a magnetic field. Only by being, your magic arises. Run toward the trees. Grasp the green shoots, seal your fate, which brims, overflowing. If innocence is at fault, then I know everything and I know nothing. Fondly so. There's no arguing with shadows. Surprised? Once on a flight from Vancouver, a Venetian woman assured me that languages have been jumbled for millennia. Several voices speak at once or as at once, at least for a second. The receiver of conversation thinks she is alive. Another thinks I'm dead, she said, stammering. Soon we'll have to be reassigned to half speech. The world, of course, is mute. I went back to that dreary flophouse in Shanghai, assured the pot was ready for boiling, but the shadows concealed themselves. A first refuge revealed the essence of their memory. Handcuffs, the man said, clenching his teeth. A form of survival, I thought. In between the applause and the ribbons, there will be something else, something like habitat, where existence is really possible without exaltation, where habitat is liberation, where exile and martyrdom are the best means safe from infamy. Jesus Christ, to be liberated is surely to be divine. Now we are between churches, nothing in common but the rhyme. Absurd, all that time spent on hope. Still, I suppose anything that exists beyond the existable awakens the most profound shadows. All thumbs. Mushrooms like fingers push up through the soil. The robins seem disinterested. There's enough seed here to go around. A warm current down at the knees. Standing in place, following the crooked flight path of the corpulent bumblebees. They're back this year, the size of thumbs. The murmuring turkeys, the gurgling killdeer, and the slow mumble of traffic. Far beyond the pines, there's someone out there turning wheels, but deeply invisible. Fathoming. There are those who advise me to preserve these fragments. Forgive me, but there is nothing that walks toward us. Find the heavenly gates, they say, but only once you're several pages in. The unwritten somehow glides through. It's very persistent, but likely a bad bargain. Remember the hour of my words, the clunking of the antique sewer system, the hatch that opens above when night falls. Tear yourself away from these words, even if the letters pile up. All questions go unanswered. Who would have thought so? Bare bones. Unlearning what came before, unlearning the murder on 22nd Street, unlearning the cast of characters, the where, the when, the how, the why, until the Dow Jones took off again. And still the grave has a bunch of poses. And your shoelaces creak as you reach to put them in place, even when they are Hangzhou silk and Ningbo plastic. Unwondering what came before, unwondering that curve on the horizon, unwondering the thief who snatched your purse on some unknown avenue in Sao Paulo. Did we truly come across an unfamiliar threshold? Unlearn all those lessons in the woods? We leapt hard and high on our foolhardy feet. This was the gin that gods mixed in our martinis. This was the last dance, exiting alone, a real high on the night job. And even when she turns to sigh, the grass is still sprinkled with gold. And we move to a major highway, knowing it's better for our health. Can a man like me bounce back? You know, it's all in the wrist, but as Yaroslav once said, the others are simply apparitions. They are creatures of another purpose. The defect is in the boat. Drop your eyes. Who can twist the counterforce, force open the iron gates of the keep? Atone alone, dear creature. Truth matters. Even the Mirtheists cultivated a mystique. The Renaissance was no romance, believe me. And yes, they had an armistice. And yes, Italy is not in our hearts, but in our bones. Common law suggests all is not lost yet. There's one called Facial Mud Scrub. On a calm day, the sun seeks sweet wildflowers. Each soul is alone, no consolation in crowds. As the railway sleeps northward, lovers are in despair, waiting for that fateful moment of self-discovery. Too young to atone for the sins of the fathers, too old to care. Life is hard enough, even no consolation. On that night, a star vanished, simply ignited in a ball of contemplation, an afterthought of drizzle quenching the herbage. Draped in our towels, we do atone for the ill deeds and deathly nights before enlightenment to read the sum of things, those who didn't make it or made it through the middle drains down in the parish. Lightning in the summer day upon the meadow and vale, more a streaming than a breath, then in another way not satisfying, even with our ointments and our lathers, muds of varying colors, the peacock strutting beneath that glassy dome, and in the center the fountain spouting, a languid amphibian rises, squirting scents to inhibit and surprise, to seduce, to vandalize, in everything a sense of excretion, of exorcism, of transmogrification, a known deed, the foundations of folly and deep exercise, and the cheese unhold, clenched tight as a lactose intolerance fist, streaked in a pottage of dill and thyme, but thin, spaced out in finger bowls with crackers made of rice. No hesitation, though. The eradication, faintly wry or condescending, might be the last surprise scene. And yet here we dwell on the remainder of a forest, on the edge of the last strip mall where lounging seniors fly to the outer limits, where everyone is kept on a bright red bejeweled leash, sparkling in food lamps. They wave at you on the way out to the door, and your head, those two lines about love, too wild to repeat here. Oh, and these happy monuments of dread and delight through the turnstile, across the hall, deep down in the keepsake temple where trinkets are passed around, where all that gnawing and nibbling goes on, the mold lining the casements, the climate just ventilated enough to connote an ample wild breeze. Oh, for the love of the ample, the efficient, sufficient, the door frame that makes you bend your head, vowed to measure and trace the live, for the liver and the lungs and our fathers still to come, to dwell on the edge of absolution and write only of one simple dream, a luxury, or perhaps something more sinister. Passion pink toenails are all the rage, or perhaps something like winning the Nobel Prize in abject apathy, to stride forth with nothing in the back of your head but to revert back to birth. Peach blossom, skinned, luxuriant, smelling of goose feathers. From our bathroom door, the light streaks in, measured sounds of laughter and clapping. Honestly, it's rough to begin again. Whose eyes should you seek first? Whose hair to ply or multiply? Even as we speak, several dots appear on the horizon. And I think maybe three more. This one's called Savoir-faire. Let's move out at a snail's pace, tuck into time backward. Yes, there are logistical problems with this endeavor, but on this, we need to stand alone. No one's a single thing. Yes, I know that gives you pause, whether one or two, what's the difference? The earth sends greetings. Okay, so I assure you, it's all preserved in jam jars, in pickled beans, in the million stairs you've walked, in your cascade of reality. No mind what you think of reality. There are synaptic connections, all words written in lowercase. Let's feign admiration. Let's tear it to shreds between the Turkish cigarette and the absinthe. Yes, you fight back blindly, but as well as any other couple, you use one umbrella. You embrace the cold and fog together. One memory rides the wave, sees between the fingers. It's not about the past. You'll get no arms. I know it never occurred, and yes, this is the sorrow, the faint blur in the heart, as if all form is missing. Who wouldn't be concerned? But some things can't be explained. What is our notion of existence? The books, the pegs, the washing lines, the moss-hungry wrens building time for their own. She who perches all reigning in the apple trees, or she who gasps away her own reality. Don't gape. At the bottom of the basket, words aren't the least bit happy. Personally, I prefer to sleep on a modest blanket. A golden apple. A sad time for the old man, your portrait hanging over the mantel, across the threshold, a passion for quiet words. How might that he in his vagrant quarter, the neon quarter, where prostitutes address their multitudes in their garter and glitter, in their garb and gab, in their fingernails and fluster, would you look at that? Cat got your tongue. As the bench against the pitted wall I've found, all have departed as martyrs. Something urges me to find a church and go inside, avoiding the stare of gold, avoiding the supplicant saints and pigeons fussing away. Yes, the snow-blanched spires of the cathedral look far too divine, far too imposing. At sunset, still on the bench, observing the runes in the clouds, attempting a smattering of Old Norse. By Zeus, you say, offering me a lukewarm coffee with those vacant eyes. Let's off to the Urals, you cheer, pouring a hefty dose of irony. You tell me the story of a merchant on his way to Harlem, and a truck filled with canned goods, but with a mind to meet the old man in the mountain. You tell me of your time in a trans-Siberian gulag, locked in the chains of the secret police. Surely trans means moving, ongoing, at crossways. Along the road to Nuovo Vitalis, you say, are to be found untold secrets. I feign away for a second, for a minute or two. Secrets like the secret police? Yes, you say. A pack of living beasts. But my heart isn't in it as I turn to the colonnade, watch a woman sleeping in the shade and feel the words of a great llama calibrating. If 40 thieves on their way to samsara might slip on the train tracks one after the other, or a trapeze artist burning high on drum beats would fall at the sound of a kazoo, do you honestly think the Eiffel Tower will split in two when an ice cream van does the rounds? And here's, I think, the second to last one, Limbic Spin. And this one's a prose poem. Le bonheur des bons vivants, you said, thinking I would have no idea what you spoke. You said, les légionnaires are a foreign tribe who rose from the Kalahari. I said, remember in those days we were content with a photo of the lake, yours in theirs? In those days, the conference had subsided. The candidates in their cryogenic crypts, all that churning in the brain, slim pickings for the crows. Repeat the phrase. Clearly things are not as you said. Your exhalation, not mine. Someday, you said, you'll be without them too. Hope you can hope to achieve between gratitude and certitude. And by the way, it's all the rage. And that eagerness, that circumnavigational route, the lake that would not. Come on, it's early. Already the plumber is on vacation, and given his height, he will devour himself. Know this, I stand for you, you who belong amongst the rocks, and despite all the obstructions, that preponderance of envy, find the turtle, even with his maps. And likely a lack of decency, it ain't so heavy, but inventions of his own making, despite your whines. No, it will be impossible otherwise. And the last one, murmurs. More than a year ago, the strange crew More than a year now, the strange crews work 2 by 2 as the airplanes drone overhead. 10 plagues of Egypt have descended, but even now to talk of them is strangely taboo. Alligators raise their eyes to the surface, and the dome of the sky is the color of pumice. Factory stacks are still puffing away. all in the name of hard science. The scene opens like a newspaper, the landscape scarred in infinite tracks. And just at this moment, a traveler stands in the doorway. You can tell he's committed a crime. His wry grin betrays any last chance to meet the eyes. Go on, he cries, goading the crews of 2 by 2 in their prerogative of all. Sound words, he says, solid advice. His ankle boots are sharkskin, his perfumed hat ripe in a peacock plume. His sheen drenches the air. We knew it would come to this, he says, pulling 3 brand new bills from his deerskin wallet. One of the most beautiful spots in northern Odophilia. He laughs. We'll be finished in a week or 2. Then they'll all descend from the hills and flood in here like a plague of rodents. Be ready, he says. They'll all try to fleece you. I nod quietly, staring at the unfinished reinforced concrete. A mouse crosses the street. A vulture circles. Thank you.
Wonderful, Mark. Thank you so much. I bet people got from that reading that these are poems that, like so much of your work, really require, will encourage multiple readings. I hope people will buy the book and spend time with it, and we'll be sure and put this up on the YouTube if people want to hear it again. It's really, really worth taking in a few times. Some really layered stuff.
Thank you, John.
Mark, do you want to talk about the next lip balm coming up?
Oh yeah, sure. So the next lip balm coming up is the Denise Levertov show. I don't know who of you are fans, but I certainly am. Mark Pollock came out with a book with My Own Mad Hat Press fairly recently, a memoir of his time with Denise, including many interesting encounters and experiences and takes on her poetry. And so on February 12 on Lip Balm, we will be featuring the life and work of Denise Levertov and her former students, including Arthur Tsay, Dick Laurie, David Shattuck, Margot Tass-Stever, Susan Eisenberg, and Mark Pollock himself. We'll all be reading of Denise's work, and Donna Krolik-Hollenberg, who is, I believe, the preeminent biographer of Denise, will be interviewing Mark on his own memoir about his experiences, shall we say, growing up with Denise. My Deniversity, the book's called. So that's coming up on February 12th at 5 p.m. Well, yeah, that's the next lip balm.
Thanks. Yeah, and people can find it through Litbalm on Facebook or litbalm.org. That's LITBALM.org. Has all the times and the Zoom room. Thank you so much, Teow. Thank you so much, Carol. Thank you so much, Tobey. Thank you so much, Mark. It's been a wonderful show. I really enjoyed hearing everyone. I'm going to allow people to unmute themselves now if anybody wants to talk, and I'll go ahead and shut down the recording, but I'll leave the room open if anyone would like to talk. Again, thanks everyone so much for being here, and it was really a great evening. I really enjoyed myself.
Thank you, Jonathan.
Thanks, Jonathan. It was terrific.
Thank you, Jonathan, and Tal and Tobey and Mark. It's a great evening.
Yes. Thank you, Carol and Teow. Also, it was just wonderful. Very, very rich.